So we are moving on to part 5, and this is just the overall results and then the summary of how well the students did. So let me try and move over here. All right, so objective 1, I wanted them to analyze the potential severity of the health risks associated with all 3 of the drugs. So each time I came into class, I opened the slide deck, had the Pear Deck interactive slides, questioned students, got some answers, and then we would move on to whatever the formative assessment would be, whether it was the effects of vaping assessment, the cannabis and the news assessment, or the fentanyl reflection video. So it was pretty much the same routine each time I went into class. Take notes from the PowerPoint, discussions, formative assessment. So for all 6 of my objectives, I wanted at least 80% to meet or exceed the standards. And for this one, there was some significant improvement, but they did not overall meet the 80%. And there was a slight change because 17 students took the pre-test and only 15 were present for the post. So that possibly threw off some of the data. But just looking at what ways to improve, like I said before, it needed to be looking at the lessons as a whole. It needed to be less of me lecturing and kind of giving more responsibility to the students, so that way I could hear from them more. And then just more how and why questions so they can elaborate on the severity of drugs. Some of the questions in the beginning were pretty much yes or no, so we couldn't really get into detail. So just expanding and going to a higher level on my questioning may have been beneficial for this objective. Objective 2 was to have students evaluate valid and reliable health products and services related to all 3 of the drugs that we talked about. So in this lesson, again, note-taking from the PowerPoint, discussion questions with my effective questioning on Pear Deck slides, which again worked very well, but the way I did it was I would pose the question and then just read out the responses. So again, it was still just hearing my voice and not necessarily the students. I could have challenged the students more and just asked them and just elaborate again, taking the questions to a higher level and hearing more from students. And in this one, with evaluating reliable health information, it was the cannabis and the news lesson. So I had students go in to their computers, look at articles, and then answer the questions based on that formative assessment handout. Again, 80% did not meet or exceed the standard, a slight change, but not enough where I really felt like I succeeded in this objective. Majority of this objective was on me. There was some technology issues, and I just didn't give students enough time to really think about what they were reading and have them answer the questions. So this objective was a complete failure, I have to say. But the idea was there. I just really needed to have backup plans for this lesson, but it was just not going the way I wanted it to go. But for improvement, and I kind of did it on the spot, was to have students find their own websites, because I had originally free articles that I wanted groups to look at, and then it would go from there. And also maybe just give one article and then for everyone, and then give specific groups one question to focus on, and then we could come together as a group and talk about whether or not the article is valid, how can we determine that, what makes you think it's valid, so on and so forth. So we'll definitely be doing that in the future because I think it was a really good idea, just could not execute it in the time that I had. The results for objective 3, they kind of were on the right track to meeting the objective in the pretest, and then a slight change at the end. So this was just to analyze the barriers that prevent someone to making a healthy decision, which I really got to hear more from students in the post assessment where they wrote the letter as to why they started taking these drugs. But same thing, note taking from the PowerPoint, effective questioning. They do a formative assessment, and this objective touched on the effects of vaping formative assessment, where they underlined the health effects and then answered questions. But there were some issues with the pear deck and just some of the slides in general. I would have a question at the top, and then the idea would be to click next, and then it would give them the content, but instead the slideshow just reported everything. So I pretty much gave students the answers and didn't really allow students to think. So again, not really hearing much from students, so I would want that to change so I can hear more from them. And maybe just draw on the prevalence of the overall topic of vaping and just relate it to their lives, because we talked about it a little bit. I'm like, e-cigarettes have been around for years, and the severity and the negative effects are clear. We hear about them all the time, but yet students are still using these products. Why? So really wanted to get more in depth about that. But again, that could have been through my questioning and just having students talk to each other before interacting with me or the whole class. So explaining the value of applying a thoughtful decision-making process in drug-related situations. So here again, they already met this objective from the get-go. So I really could have taken a different direction and challenged them more with higher level questions. And just at this point, I just started to realize that I needed to diversify the activities. Because like I said before, it was the same thing with the learning experiences. Note taking from the PowerPoint, discussion questions, and then they would do the formative assessments. So I could have heard from students more about the value of making decisions, how to make a right decision, what barriers could you come into contact with making a healthy decision. We could have went a little further with that. So I think they overall met the objective. Again, less students were there for the post assessment, but they overall did well with the journal activity. So this objective was discussed during the fentanyl documentary video that I mentioned before. Again, we went over briefly what fentanyl was about through a Google slide deck with Pear Deck interactive slides. Then I introduced them to the documentary video. They watched it. And then there was just little time for them to complete the reflection assessment, which I really wanted to get to and have a little bit of time at the end to talk about it, but we were just out of time. But it was a very well done documentary, and I think it really got to the point. And again, for improvement, just less lecturing and just more time to discuss on those questions, because I think it would have been very valuable for me to hear, like, if they're really understanding the severity of these drugs. And maybe I could have questioned them again about their personal goals. If your friend walked up to you and gave you an Adderall pill, would you take it? Would you take that risk of jeopardizing the goals that you've set for yourself? Because we talked about it, fentanyl can kill you in an instant with a simple grain of salt in the amount. It could kill you. So really could have went into depth on those questions and hear from students more there. But with the post assessment, they all did very well with defending the healthy choice to not use these drugs. And objective 6, again, this touched on the effects of vaping lesson and the fentanyl lesson. So just demonstrating a variety of healthy practices and behaviors to maintain and improve your overall health. Again, did not meet the 80% standard that I had set. But again, just higher level thinking questions and maybe doing think pair share squared, like just different ways for the students to interact with each other before interacting with me, because I do feel like there was some reluctance to talking about these drugs, because I knew, and I told them as well, that I know that they knew about these drugs. I know that they know what's going on. So I was really trying to pry this information out of them and trying to hear what they thought about teens and adolescents their age using these drugs. So again, just creating a more interactive classroom and diversifying the activities to just make it overall interesting. I think they enjoyed the Google slide decks and the questions, but you know, for me, like, I don't think I was getting enough out of the students verbally and in that moment, but I would see it on paper. So I really just wanted to hear from students more. So this is the overall unit objective breakdown, the results for 1 through 6. The overall goal was for students to understand the factors involved in vaping, fentanyl, marijuana use, and prevention of substance use in order to increase their well-being and just to allow students to achieve their life goals. Like what I was talking about this whole time was that we touched on what goals they want to achieve in their life, but we bring these drugs in, how is that going to affect your goals? So I really wanted that to be the focus. And just overall, just like I said before, just having more student engaging activities, student centered plan opportunities. So I needed to plan more for critical thinking questions and discussions ahead of time, and then incorporate more group and partner activities. A lot of them in the accessibility table mentioned that they don't like group work, they needed more time, but I felt like when talking about such hot topics that like are so relevant to them, I think they would have benefited from group work by just talking to each other about what they think, what their friends are doing, and how might that affect their goals. So just you can clearly see what was almost met, met, not met, and just what I said before, just having students lead in their learning and trusting them, because they certainly could have handled that information and certainly could have taken a lot of ownership on their own learning. I just needed to be more as a guide for them and not me teaching you, do the work, see ya. So I learned a lot through this process. I certainly improved as a health educator going into high school again, and not stepping foot into a high school in a long time was very overwhelming, but it overall went very well. But a few things that I learned was to, again, spend less time lecturing and just managing my overall time, so I give students enough time to complete the assessment. Because like I said before, a number of them needed more time. Talking too much and doing the assessments during class period it took a lot of time, so a number of them had to return the assessments the next day. Asking effective questions and critical thinking, I think I did very well with that. I think that makes for a very effective health educator. And just the value of discussions. Again, more student to student interaction and having them talk about certain topics and them reporting back to me or reporting back to the whole class is very valuable and can definitely take activities in your classroom to the next level. Giving students the appropriate time to complete activities is important because you don't want to be disrespectful and cut them off short, and you want to give them time to give you great work. And just providing relevant information and just interesting activities. Like I said before, I brought up a number of things that were happening within their area, within their school that they might find interesting. And then I could have tied that in more by creating more interesting activities where it's not just a handout and they do the work, just a little bit more creative, something along the lines of my performance assessment. So I feel like if I have a lot of activities like the performance assessment, it's very authentic, they write a journal and they talk about it, I think those activities will go a long way in future lessons. If you click on this picture, you will be able to see all of the data for all the students, post-test, pre-test, and you can just really get a glance for what objectives were met and what where we fell short. These are just the references that I used. A ton of information's out there for health educators, which is really great. But thank you so much for listening and sticking through this presentation. It was a great experience, and I'm looking forward to student teaching in the fall and just continuing to remain positive and optimistic. Thank you.